I went ahead and I did a thing. The terminators are off the Sears Killer behind me, and I went with different tires. I was not happy with the way the terminators looked. They looked very good in my head, but they didn't look too good on the tractor. Some of you might disagree, but this is what I ended up going with. I got 28-inch Outlaws in the rear, which I'm going to be recentering the wheels and putting some rings on there and kicking them out further. And then on the front I have these Black Diamond, I think they're STIs. Yeah, STI Black Diamond 27 by 9 by 12s on the front. So that's pretty close to where it will be sitting. And shout out to the girlfriend for hooking me up with a new jack for a late birthday gift. But other than that, I got the new motor sitting on the bench over here. It's an 18 horsepower Vanguard Vtwin horizontal shaft. We got some parts for it in the mail, so let's check them out. So these 28 by 9 by 12 Outlaws are killer on this thing. They're 9.5, sorry. But I got the new Transaxle down in there, painted black just like the other one. I still have to put the input pulley on, and I actually modified my shifter a little bit more. This abomination, but right there, that bump out, this used to be straight, and I put that little 90 in there because whenever you would shift it into whatever gear this is, I can't remember, it would hit the high and low shifter and kick it over. So I put that, I put that little 90 on there, so that should be pretty good. But the other thing is, this is welded on here, so I gotta try and figure out how to get this boot over that. So I might have to cut that apart and make it so it clamps on or whatever. But getting one step closer. This is the 18 horsepower Briggs & Stratton Vanguard V-Twin that's going to be going in the Sears Killer, and before we throw it in the machine, we're going to do some upgrades to it. These are my 18 horsepower heads that are ported that were on my first racing mower. We're going to put those in it, and then I got steel push rods to replace the aluminum intake push rods, so that way we don't have to worry about any bent push rods. I got dual valve springs from EC Carburetors. I'll post the specs right now. And then I got EC Carburetors valve spring retainers. There's the part number. They're nice anodized red. And then big shout out to Creepy Crawler. He sent me this dual barrel carburetor and intake for a Vanguard. And for right now, we're not going to throw this on here because I need an intake 90. EC Carburetors is out of stock, and I think another website, they wanted almost $20 to ship a part that's even smaller than this carburetor. So if anyone has an intake 90 for a horizontal shaft Vanguard V-Twin, I'll post a picture. Get in contact with me if you got a reasonable price. I would love to have one. But for right now, we're going to put these parts on. We're going to remove the governor, and I'm going to show you how to advance or retard your timing without a timing key. Now, it's not anything too specific, so it's kind of hit or miss. You just do it and wish for the best, but I've seemed to have some decent outcome so far from doing it. But yeah, let's tear into this motor, and hopefully we can get this done pretty quick. So before I go ahead and put the valve springs and valve retainers and put these heads together, I'm going to go ahead and lap the valves. I actually did 3 of them already, and there's valve lapping tools. They're a little stick with suction cups on it, and they see if I can get one to work. These are kind of old, but they stick to the valve, and you put it down in there, put the valve lapping compound, and you go back and forth and grind it. But the nice thing about these lawnmower heads is you can go ahead, put some valve grinding compound on your valve, a little bit goes a long way. And I got a little bit of water over here that I'm gonna lube it up. You're gonna put your valve down into the head, and then you can take a drill, put it onto the end of the valve on this side, and what you want to do is low RPMs, and you want to pull the drill back towards you so it pushes the valve against the seat. And I also like to push on my finger to push some more pressure on there. So just low RPM, and you move the valve in and out to grind the seat. You don't have to do too much unless the valve is really bad. Put it in reverse. Do a little bit more. And that's about it, because these valves weren't too bad. And then you pop that valve out. You rinse and wipe it off. And what you're looking for is a nice uniform grind to that seat. I don't know if you're going to be able to tell. It's definitely not going to focus. Right there on the edge. And then make sure you get all the valve grinding compound out of that head, because you don't want to get that down in the cylinder whenever you go to fire that motor for the first time. It's basically like sand in a paste form, and that doesn't really like cylinder walls too well. So just make sure you clean out your heads pretty good after you're done grinding your valves, and then you can go ahead and put your valve springs back in after you're done grinding. It's definitely a whole lot easier whenever you actually have the proper tooling. There's one. So close. That one's just barely catching. There we go. And seated down in there. And boy, is that hard to press. That's what we want. Here's the part where you're going to be a little bit careful. I'm going to advance the timing of this engine without a timing key. And where you got to be careful is how far you twist this flywheel will determine whether your motor's even going to actually run or not. So most people think that this timing key, this little Woodruff key that goes into the crank, is what holds your flywheel in place. Well, what actually holds your flywheel in place is the taper of the crank and the taper inside the flywheel. And whenever you tighten down the nut, it makes a press fitting onto this shaft, and that's why you can't just slide a flywheel off whenever you take the nut off. You got to put a puller or tap on it to get it to break loose, is because this press fitting is what is actually holding that flywheel on. Now just keep in mind that they do sell advanced timing keys that are about $7 or $8 for most small engines. I highly suggest you just spending that money and getting an advanced timing key. But this is just the way that I do it. It saves a little bit of time. I don't have to wait for shipping or anything. But what you're going to need is some valve grinding compound, which you really don't need this step, but it makes me feel a little bit better. What you're going to do is you're going to put valve grinding compound on the shaft, and you're going to lap the flywheel to this crank, which it pretty much already is, but this makes it even better fit. And then I'll show you what we do from there. I'm just going to put a couple dabs on the crank, smear it around with my finger. And I'm going to spray a little bit of water on it. And I'm going to take my flywheel, I'm going to put it on like I'm installing it. And then I'm just going to spin the flywheel without the crank moving back and forth. And that valve lapping compound is going to grind the flywheel and the crank at the same time to make a perfect mating surface. Then you pick it up, spray a little bit more water on there, make sure it's all lubed up. And oh, now it don't want to come off. There we go. That's pretty much all you gotta do. Then you're gonna take your rag, clean this up. So I went ahead and put a little blue mark of Sharpie right where that keyway is, so that way when you're looking up down from the top, you can see where that keyway was whenever you put the flywheel on. Now that I have the flywheel on, you can see that the blue Sharpie shows me where that key slot is in the crank. So that's about where the flywheel would sit if the keyway was in there. And we want to advance the timing, so these small engines, specifically this Briggs & Stratton Vanguard, spins clockwise. So to advance the timing, you would want to rotate the flywheel clockwise, and if you wanted to retard the timing, you would turn it counterclockwise. So we want to advance it, so we're just going to turn the flywheel about a 1/16 of an inch. And before I go ahead and tighten this down, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some blue Loctite on the crank. You do not have to use this either, but this is just a little bit extra precaution to keep that flywheel in place if the nut isn't tightened down enough or it backs off or whatever. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to tighten it down. Now, like I said, I highly suggest you just go and buy the timing keys for this. It makes it a lot easier. The keys are specific to the amount of degrees that they advance the timing. But this is just the way I do it. It's a lot quicker for me just to do this. So, yep.